Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Florence Giselle. Today we are going to talk about the regulation of generative AI. So, welcome, Florence. It's great to have you. So I'm going to start with your report. So she wrote the most comprehensive report on generative AI regulation. It's called Regulating Under Uncertainty, Governance Options for Generative AI. It has 470 pages. You should absolutely download it if you haven't already. It's the most comprehensive report we have so far about the regulation of generative AI and what's happening worldwide. So I wanted to tell us more about the drafting process. So it's a very long, detailed, comprehensive document. So what were the challenges of producing such a complete document?
So the main the main challenge that we had is that we started to work while the AI Act was being drafted, and when we started, we had the versions that had just been voted in the EU Parliament, which was substantially different from the previous versions, but which was also modified in the further versions. So it was, we had to keep up with the evolution of the draft. And so this is the reason why you can find at the end of the report, you have an appendix with a table that shows some of the various versions of the AI Act, because originally we drafted the table for us. Because it could have been very, very misleading. At some point you have a reference to foundation models, but then it was changed. So now the wording is general purpose AI model. So we had to deal with this, with renumbering of the articles, etc. So this was, of course, what we needed to be cautious of. The other aspect is the fact that we wanted to include a chapter on AI risk, because this report was about regulating under uncertainty. Why? Because at the time we drafted the report, at the time the EU AI Act was drafted, and it's still true today, you still have discussions about AI risks, about the fact that those risks are real, or we are just anticipating them. Is there a scientific consensus, etc.? And so it was really difficult to work on those risks. We wanted to do it because we wanted to show that when countries or regions decide to regulate, they do it because there is a reason to regulate. And in the case of the EU, it's because of this idea of precaution. We have this precautionary principle that is of major importance in the EU legal order. And so we wanted to show that there is a reason, and that the regulation tries to address risks that have been identified. But of course, working on those risks is not easy. At the time, the Benjo report had not been published yet, so no, we can rely on something, but it was not the case when we started to work on the report. So this was also a challenge, because and no, risks are still being discussed and sometimes contested. So it's still an evolving question.
And I'm glad you started with the EU. I have some questions about EU regulation, Digital Omnibus. And in 2 weeks, the EU will reach a decision on the final version, the final amendments to the AI Act. So it's a great topic. I want to ask your opinion. So you've been very much into the EU AI Act and the EU regulatory model for AI. And what is your personal opinion on the Digital Omnibus for AI? So the changes being proposed, including, for example, postponements of the rules for high-risk AI systems, or the dilution of the AI literacy obligation. Now it will be an obligation for the member states. So all those changes being proposed. What is your perspective, Florence? Do you think that they are a reaction to the Draghi report, a direct reaction? So Europe must do something, and that's kind of our reaction, also including the omnibus, the other omnibus, the side of the amendments to the GDPR and to the other data laws. Do you think that there is a reaction, an attempt to align with the US, so to be more business friendly, as we heard during the AI summit last year, right? All the EU officials Ursula von der Leyen, other people saying, we are going to remove the red tape, we are going to be more business friendly. And then we saw some posts by Trump saying, you're discriminating against American companies. So there was all that political side of it. So I want to hear your perspective. So first, do you agree? Do you think it's a welcome change that those changes being proposed in the omnibus, are they positive in your perspective? And also, do you think they are going to solve the problem that they're supposed to solve, right? So it's all the digital omnibus and all those amendments are being proposed to support innovation, right? To help Europe, I'll say, win the AI race, and we can discuss what is to win the AI race, but to become more competitive. Do you think it will help or not?
So regarding the first part of your question, I think that yes, the main reason for this digital omnibus is the Draghi report, and the way the Draghi report highlighted the issues with EU competitiveness. So of course there are many questions and topics that are raised in this report. Basically, I would mention two of them. The fact that there still is a real fragmentation in the EU. So we need, of course, better harmonization and make sure that the companies that we have, especially the small and medium companies, can really operate at the EU level and benefit from the EU market. So this fragmentation issue is one point. The other point that is highlighted in this report is the regulatory burden, which is real, especially on small companies, especially on innovative companies. And of course, he criticizes the bureaucracy, the paperwork. It is true, and I would share this point about, for example, GDPR. When you look at how GDPR was implemented and enforced since it entered into force since 2018, you can see that there were discrepancies in the way GDPR rules have been implemented in the different countries. We know, for example, that the Irish Data Protection Authority was criticized by other data protection authorities in the past. So it's not fully harmonized and fully consistent. And we also know when we look, and it's very true, I met with various AI companies, small AI companies in France, and the regulatory burden that is related to GDPR rules is real. And it's a problem for them because and it's a lot of paperwork. When you talk to your lawyers, when you talk to those companies, you can see that it doesn't significantly change the way they will design their products, but it affects the time they spend on, yes, what they call paperwork, the assessments, even when you want to transfer data, you have the standard contractual clauses and etc. So it's a lot, and I think this is what the Draghi report was about, and it is also what the Digital Omnibus is about to a certain extent, because the idea is to relax the regulatory burden for small companies and make sure that the young, innovative companies that we have in Europe can grow. So thanks to regulatory sandboxes, thanks to real-world testing, thanks to more flexible requirements, even in terms of data protection, etc. So this, I think, is important. I do not see the provision on high-risk AI systems that postpones the entry into force of some of the provisions for high-risk AI system until we have the technical standards. I don't see it as a way to introduce more flexibility. It's not just realistic. It's just really pragmatism. But it also illustrates how long the process is. And so this is something that you can see as well in the Draghi report. That the regulatory process and the decision process is too slow. I would say, well, it's the cost to be in a democracy. You have a lot of people around the table and you need to reach an agreement and it takes time. But it's also, it makes things more complicated of course, for companies.
So in general, I would say you're optimistic about the omnibus. You think it's going to help Europe to be more innovative?
I hope so, but these are very minor modifications. This is not going to completely change the regulatory landscape. I was very interested to see, I don't think this will be finally decided, but it was interesting to see that in the proposals you have a provision that basically narrows the definition of personal data to make sure that personal data is defined as data enabling identification when this identification is reasonably likely in the context of a specific data controller. So it slightly narrows the definition of personal data, which of course would remove the burden in many cases. I don't think this will be adopted. So the changes are real, not substantial. So I don't think it will massively, change the regulatory landscape. And I would say we are not, but it's institutionally speaking, it's very difficult to answer and to address the fragmentation issue. The fact that the European market is still too fragmented, that as I said, that regulations are not always consistently implemented and enforced, which is an institutional issue and also a political issue on many fronts, and we would need a major reform to address this. But we can see, how it works in practice. For example, and if I give an example of another tech regulation, when you look at the way the Digital Services Act is being implemented and the various initiatives by member states, I can talk about my country, France. We have currently new laws that would prohibit social media for teenagers under 15 years old. So this is a French initiative. And of course, every member state wants to have their say in the way certain regulations are implemented or about certain initiatives. So this can be seen as a good thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's also a sign of fragmentation. And this, I think, will not be solved in the near future.
I think it was last year, the end of 2024, I spoke with Professor Anna Bradford, right? We spoke about the Brussels effect and if she thought that the Brussels effect was going to happen in AI. And of course, there were end of 2024, we were in a different geopolitical landscape, right? A lot happened in 2025 and 26. And I remember she told me that besides, so that there has been a lot of focus put on GDPR and now the AI Act, but actually in her view, we should also think about, for example, bankruptcy laws, right? So penalize that, it's a bit, maybe it's also a cultural aspect if you compare United States and Europe, right? So maybe a more risk-averse behavior that is also kind of fostered by strict bankruptcy laws and other provisions that kind of endorse this risk-averse behavior, that in the end that will more directly, there's a more direct causal relationship with less innovation. Regarding Europe, we have seen interesting developments in recent months. There are a few different developments. One of those are national models. I don't know if you heard about it. There is a Swiss AI model called Apertus, and I've been writing the newsletter about this, the rising AI nationalism. So each country trying to leverage AI in their favor. So I remember this Swiss model, it focuses on multilingualism and the cultural particularities of Europe and specifically Switzerland, and also compliance with Swiss laws. And I found this super interesting, right? We talk a lot about, well, there's this kind of public narrative of the US wants to innovate and the EU wants to regulate. So there are all those jokes that European companies don't innovate so much. So when I saw that, that's an interesting European way to innovate, right? So having a national model, kind of this new form of AI-powered nationalism that kind of also fosters or supports local culture. I wanted to ask, what do you see as European advantages in the AI race? So there's on one side, there are all those different conceptions of what does it mean to win the AI race, right? Probably China and the US, each side is probably saying they are winning in their own perspective. And I think that Europe also wants to win in their own way. So how do you see as the main potential European advantages in this race? And what could it mean for Europe to win the AI race, or to be a winning side of the AI race?
Well, I would see, I'm probably biased, but I would see as a major advantage the fact that we have in Europe well-trained and highly qualified engineers, researchers, computer scientists, many interesting ideas, many innovative initiatives. And so this is real. This is real. A few years ago, I conducted a survey at the request of a European agency. I conducted a survey on AI companies in France, and it was 5 years ago. I was impressed to see that there were so many projects. So of course, the problem is that those projects lack investment. So we need more investment. This is something that is identified in the Draghi report. And so they are not, and they also probably suffer from the fact that the market is still too fragmented. And I hope that we can solve this issue at some point to enable these companies and these initiatives to grow and to scale. So yes, I would see this as a major strength. The fact that we have so many competent people and people who have ideas. On the sovereignty question, it's a complicated issue. I would probably use the expression that is mostly used by the French government, the EU authorities, which is strategic autonomy. I think the main question for Europeans at the moment is to make sure that they're not dependent on foreign technology. The problem of semiconductors, the problem of data storage and cloud, these are two essential critical conditions if you want to be independent to a certain extent. And so this is what the EU is currently trying to address. I have no idea, whether this will succeed or not, but these are major conditions to meet if you want to be reasonably independent in that sphere. So when you hear about the AI race, yes, you want to, of course, you want to be independent in terms of semiconductors. It's a requirement.
And I would say there is this specific political challenge that is particular to Europe, which is Europe is a bloc. The EU is a political and economic bloc, but at the same time, of course, each member state wants their own decisions, and it also, of course, affects the regulatory side of it. Right? Of course, there are democracy exists, so there are different political opinions, different visions of the future of Europe. What is the new Europe? I think there is a lot going on. You probably have a lot to say about that too. I want to move a little bit to the US, then maybe we can build a bridge with Europe. In the US, regarding AI regulation, we have the current scenario, right? So there are a few US states that are interested in regulating AI. So we have initiatives in California. Recently, I wrote about the new AI laws in New York. So some very interesting laws, super pro-human, focusing on really protecting various aspects of how AI can harm people and can harm workers and so on. We have Colorado with its now famous law and many other state laws. At the federal level, Trump has made clear that it's a light touch, as light as possible, right? So protecting children, some specific vulnerable groups, so specific sectoral laws, but nothing as close to the AI Act or something comprehensive. And it's all this narrative around light touch. So how do you see this this conflict. What is your view of maybe how the next 5 years of AI regulation in US will look like, in your opinion?
So it's of course it's difficult to anticipate. The first point is that it's pretty understandable that you want one single framework for the US. It's the exact same reasoning as for the EU. You do not want a fragmented market, so it's perfectly understandable that you do not want specific frameworks in different states with different types of obligations for AI providers or AI developers. And you can understand what someone would say, well, it's not good. We do not want any type of regulatory fragmentation because at the end of the day, this will hurt us. And this is basically what I can say about the EU here as a European can say, see, we regulate, but we avoid fragmentation. But joke apart, this point is understandable. I'm not sure that, this executive order with this AI litigation task force that is tasked with challenging state laws, I'm not sure that this will have a lot of impact, but it's very, very difficult to say. And I'm a European lawyer, but so what we're seeing is certain states deciding to regulate, especially the riskiest models or systems. This is what California has been doing. The RAISE Act in New York is also innovative and ambitious. But it's difficult to tell what's going to happen and how this will affect the way AI developers develop their models. What I see happening here is something that Anu Bradford, I think, speaks about it in her first book about the Brussels effect, if I remember properly. The fact that we witness in the US what I would call ex post regulation or ex post governance as opposed to ex ante governance. So Europe has an ex ante approach because Europe has the precautionary principle, because Europe wants to prevent and mitigate risks, before the risks materialize. Here, we have a free market. Innovation grows freely, but at some point, there is a liability issue. And so what we can see, and it's basically in the past 6 months, we've seen new complaints. You have pending procedures against OpenAI, against Google, against various AI companies you have a suicide, a suicide litigation that is currently emerging. But it's not just about suicide, it's about AI harms. And there was 2-3 weeks ago this very, very important decision about Meta. So it was about social media, but it was about the fact that those social media platforms are considered as addictive. So they integrate addiction features. So Meta was sanctioned, Google was sanctioned, and we can see that product liability is evolving. And that those platforms in this specific decision were sanctioned because of the design of their algorithms. And so the court rejected the argument related to the First Amendment, related to Section 230. So this is a major evolution. And so what I anticipate is that there will be more and more case law. And at some point, the courts will set the standards. And the claims that we see, especially you have litigation, you have few pending claims against OpenAI based on negligence, based on product liability. And at some point, the courts will have to say, what is the standard of negligence when you develop a model? And so this is what I foresee. I think that in the coming months and years, there will be a case law emerging on that front, and that the standards will be progressively developed within this context. But this is just me, observing what is currently happening.
No, it's a great perspective. So you said, and Professor Anna Bradford calls it ex post governance. I think it really fits the American way, right? So we don't talk too much about ex ante regulation. It might scare entrepreneurs. It might make people more risk averse, right? As we were talking about the cultural implications, the cultural entrepreneurial mindset. So they let litigation go on, which is a very American way, right? And then the courts setting higher standards for example, liability. I think it's a great observation, and always also in data protection. So I wrote both my master's and my PhD thesis about European data protection law, and there is all this narrative about the EU likes to regulate, EU over regulation, GDPR is too hard, right? Especially in American circles, we hear a lot about. But when you compare GDPR fines with FTC fines, and the Federal Trade Commission also takes care of us, deals with privacy, the strongest cases are actually FTC cases. And if you can put them side by side, and even there are differences between the national data protection authorities, but when you usually the fines that really shape behavior are the FTC fines. If you, for example, one of the topics of my PhD thesis is dark patterns and deceptive design. The highest dark pattern fine in history was the FTC who issued, was not privacy-related dark patterns. So I think it's very interesting that sometimes the public narrative and those Twitter fights, they don't really reflect the legal reality. So and every time people say the US does not regulate privacy, that's not true. It's just not, it doesn't have the GDPR, that same comprehensive way, but there are other tools to do regulation.
And
so I really like your forecast. I think is actually correct.
And if I might add something about the FTC rulings, you might have seen, I was very interested to see that it has happened in the past years that the FTC orders what they call disgorgement. Basically, the idea is when data was unlawfully obtained, then basically you need to retrain your model without the data unlawfully, gathered. So no, there would probably be technique to retrain the model without, purely destroying the model and without, starting over from scratch. But these rulings are, yes, pretty severe, pretty tough on companies. So yes, I agree that the FTC can, pronounce heavy sanctions.
And at the same time, and kind of a sad news about that is that America's AI policy it's written there that at the federal level, they are authorized to review any FTC investigation or order that violates this federal principle that the language they use is to advance theories of liability that burden innovation. So in a way so we'll see how that will play out, right? In practice, it looks like some lawyers are already preparing something against that. But in theory, the federal administration could undo FTC ruling. So that would be would mess our argument here. I want to ask about some development based on what's happening in the US. So I've been following the regulatory strategies, what's happening in recent months. And for example, India, so a very important country, has taken an approach similar to the US, right? Kind of light touch. Let's wait and see, right? AI is very important. Many countries are seeing AI as a central part of their economic strategy, right? So they don't want to regulate and then regret. So they're kind of, okay, let's do light touch. Let's see if the current laws can take care of it. And if needed, we'll regulate later. We will see, maybe there will be some catastrophic risk happening and we'll regulate later. Kind of following the US lead and different versions of this model. We were talking about risk before. So how do you see that approach? And are you concerned? So we have the problem of AI risk, which has become with this recent Anthropic model, right? So that they decided not to release to the public. So potential catastrophic risk. They told the U.S. government, "Hey, we have something here. We are not going to release to the public," but they told everyone what's going on. So AI risk is something still mysterious, right? We don't have precise statistics. It's a debate. Some people say it's close to zero. Other people say it's close to 90%. So how do you see those light touch regulation approaches, or deregulation, or doing nothing, in light of the unpredictability of AI risk and what we don't know about AI?
So first, I wouldn't, by principle, suppose that non-mandatory rules have no effect. They have. When you have guidelines that are well informed, that result from a real dialogue with the industry, this can work. And so I wouldn't downplay, the impact of what we call soft law or just non-mandatory guidelines. And you can see that many countries that have not adopted a legal framework, comprehensive legal framework similar to the AI Act, at the same time, they have created an AI Safety Institute. So you have, say, AI safety institutes in many countries. You have one in Japan, you have one in Singapore, you have one in the UK, one in Canada. And so this is important, because when you're reactive, when you have the possibility to release guidelines that are, again, well-informed and properly developed, this can have an impact. I'm impressed here by the work that is conducted by NIST. NIST anticipates and its products guidelines. And this, to a certain extent, can have an impact. At the same time, we shouldn't, be naive. There was recently a study that was released here about, the commitments made by AI companies that were gathered at the White House in the summer of 2023. You have two announcements, one in July, one in September, with many US AI companies making commitments. And there was recently a study that was released that showed that they were not, so those commitments were not fully respected by those companies. So, of course, if there is no sanction, if there is no authority that investigate what they do, of course, the effect is limited. But still, you have initiatives that I think are important, because when you have an emerging technology, what's the first thing that the industry needs is standards and well-informed standards. And it's important that those AI safety institutes exist, that they can meet, that they can work together, because this is what will probably and hopefully help shape the AI, the standards that will be respected on the global scale. So then there is this question of those risks that are sometimes downplayed, sometimes amplified, and it's very difficult to have a real idea about what's going on and what is real, what is just, an incident that happened during a test, because you can take just one incident that happens during a test as, showing that there is a risk that is established. So it's a very complicated question. I was very interested to see, I think this was during the Delhi summit, because I try to follow what those CEOs say, and they have very, very different perspectives. So some of them will say, yes, there is an established risk of existential, existential risk that is established. And other will say, and so this is a case of Mistral, this over amplification of the existential risk or catastrophic risk it's totally exaggerated. and it's just a distraction. So this is what the CEO of Mistral said, I think in Delhi, saying this is just a distraction because the real risk is the influence that AI tools have on a daily basis over what we do professionally, what we do personally, because we have more and more people that share what they do with AI tools and their life with AI tools and their, for example, concerns about their health or their relationships with AI tools, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but which results in probably an over-influence of AI tools over what we think and what we believe. And what the CEO of Mistral said is that at the end of the day, those tools might have an influence over how we vote and how we make critical decisions. And this is the main issue that I see. But so what he said, which is, of course, he has competitors, and he said, I wouldn't exaggerate the other risks. And so if my competitors are currently exaggerating the other risk, it's because they would like to close the market in their favor. And so this reminds me of one of those proposals. I think they emerged during the winter 2023-2024. Here in the US, there was at least one proposal in Congress to impose licensing for the frontier models, for the most powerful models. There should be an independent third party or an independent agency tasked with authorizing the release of the most powerful models. And of course, you had critiques, and some people say, yes, but this agency would authorize the release of Google's models, OpenAI's models, the biggest companies' models, and it would close the market for the smaller player. And it would be, of course, an issue with all those who rely on open source models. So of course, this was an argument. But this question of releasing or not releasing a model, especially if this model is very powerful, is a real question. And I do think that at some point we will need to address this. And if you look at the AI Act, that even in the AI Act, the AI Act looks, of course, at the risk. You have the systemic risk. The AI Act imposes red teaming or test and transparency, mostly transparency for the general purpose AI models and the most powerful models. It's not that substantial, or it's you can understand why you would want more transparency and documentation and information about those models and how they were trained. But at some point, this will be, I think, a major question. A question. In the past, we've seen releases or updates conducted with insufficient testing. And so this has happened over the past 2 years. There was this version of GPT, I think it was GPT-4. There was an update of GPT-4 or GPT-4o that was sycophantic, but it was really, really too much. And the tool told people you should stop your medication. And so this has impact. And this is a really a question that is related to the decision to release a model or to update it with insufficient testing. So I do believe that there is a need for third parties, independent third parties, conducting audits and weighing in the decision to release or update a model. I think there is a need for this. I think there is a need for a procedure that involves a neutral party, because otherwise it's a race. So you want to release your new model. Of course you want to do it. So yes, so I think that this question will come back. And I just wonder if this could come back through, a liability framework, basically a standard that would say, well, you release the model, no, you have harm, you release the model with insufficient testing. You didn't have anything in place to make an informed decision about releasing the model, and a responsible decision about releasing the model. So this is what I would anticipate and hope, because I think it's the first step. You release it or you don't release it. And Anthropic wants to be responsible, and this is, of course, something that we all expect from AI providers. But for now, they have the information. No one else has the information. So they can share their concerns or not. So we don't know. And so I think there is also a need for better information of the public.
You said so many interesting things. So I remember reading about that. It's kind of an ex ante approach to regulation of general purpose AI models, right? So asking everyone, so if you want to release it, you need to license it. So a third party needs to kind of stamp it and say it's good to go. I think when I read it, and I remember there were some academic papers about the topic, and I said, this is not going to fly in the US. They're never going to accept it. They will say China, they are just releasing their open source models. They want to kind of dominate the world with their open source. So if we do this licensing thing, we are never going to win the AI race. I remember it's interesting. I like your approach that you kind of see that coming back. So it makes me optimistic. You also mentioned that it might coming back through litigation, and it's interesting that you mentioned the GPT-4o. So it was mid 2024, right? OpenAI launched the 4o, and then it was sycophantic, and sadly, all the cases of suicide related to OpenAI, the lawsuits, they're all after the release of 4o. So before there were two lawsuits against Character AI and against another AI companion. And after the release of 4o, I think there are many. I don't remember the exact number. There are murder, suicide, and I think a few mental health harms and a few suicides, and all related to 4o. I think there were two settlements against Character AI, but the suicide lawsuits against OpenAI are all ongoing. So maybe there would be. And when we talk about product liability, there is the argumentation about the effect, right? So how do we detect? How do we know if that AI was less than ideal or was defective? Right? All those product liability arguments, and the low safety, and then it goes back to your argument on standards. That's a problem, right? We do not have adequate standards that cover these emotional relationships with people, right? So the standards, they are not good enough for those scenarios. So great. I liked everything that you said. I think it could happen. It could be. So I think it would be expected that we would have some sort of licensing rule for models, but that could happen. I wanted to ask you a bit about China. So, of course, the two biggest players today in the AI race are the US and China. So, different governance models. So, of course, different political and economic systems, US and China, or China and the Western democracies. Do you think that China's political centralization is an advantage in AI? And also, it seems like their main strategy is open source models, right? It's different from the American strategy is not mainly open source, but it looks like that's how China is doing it. So how do you see this political centralization helping or not helping, especially from a regulatory point of view?
No, I wouldn't see that China's centralization is or should be an issue. There is, of course, a framework in China that has been built over the years with various acts adapted. You have various layers, and you have provisions that apply to social media platforms, but also to AI providers. When we conducted this study and we worked on those Chinese frameworks, of course we could see that there was a very strong focus on information, on and especially when it comes to AI, a very strong focus on the data used to train the models, to avoid data that is not considered as acceptable, and then of course a focus on AI outputs, and of course, mechanisms to monitor what users do with those AI tools. So there is a political aspect, but that for the rest, the impression that I have is the Chinese government really wants to win this race, and is extensively working with AI companies. You have sandbox mechanisms, you have public investments, so everything is done to support entrepreneurs, and to incentivize innovation. So my impression is that China is currently doing a very good job. They have now very, very well trained engineers, so they can do and produce very sophisticated tools, release very sophisticated tools. So I'm not a technical expert myself, but from what I could gather and understand, for example, DeepSeek was a major achievement. And so this is really, and the Chinese government is doing a good job at supporting this. And yes, as you said, they really want to play the open source card, which is probably a good strategy, and which might work at the end of the day. It's a very different strategy from the one that is chosen by US companies, and it might work. It could work.
I want to ask you about your personal views on AI. So first, do you use AI, and are you optimistic in general about AI? So do you see it? There is this very, I'll say, split, different arguments. So people who say it's mostly bad because of the negative implications, the ethical side, the legal side, or the cognitive impairment side, and other people who say mostly the positive aspects. So it could help us find cure for rare diseases, cure for cancer, or could help us solve complex problems in a short period of time. So what is your personal view on AI?
So, so this is personal because I'm first a lawyer. So my field of expertise is the law, and I think, as someone who has spent so many months working on AI risks, because I was drafting this report, I'm still an optimist because I think we shouldn't downplay also the benefits of AI. So yes, we need to be realistic about the risks, and we need to be cautious. And I agree that we need to make sure that AI companies work, are responsible and transparent, etc. But I don't think, because I'm an optimist, but I don't think that we should be too pessimistic, too scared. Let's look at mental health. Let's look at mental health. So we're seeing this wave of litigation about suicide, about people stopping their medication, but at the same time, it is more and more clear that AI has benefits with the possibility to interact with an AI tool helps people. So you have studies that are conducted, with the elderly, with people that have mental disabilities, etc. And there is benefits, a benefit. So I wouldn't be too negative in this respect, and I wouldn't be too negative about even the access to information. So we know that AI hallucinates. We know it. We're warned. We need to take this into consideration. I work with AI every day. It helps me a lot. I can also see that the AI makes mistake, and so what we need to do is to learn how to work with a tool that has positive aspects, but also flaws. So we need to be realistic about it, but we should not deprive ourselves from using these tools, I'm currently looking, at the potential impact of self-driving cars, and so what insurers foresee, and apparently, if we have, there are accidents involving Teslas. There's a bunch of accidents where the autopilot didn't work properly. You have some, but you have many accidents caused by humans, and apparently roads might be safer in the future thanks to AI, because an AI doesn't get tired, because an AI doesn't drink. So we shouldn't probably exaggerate the real. We need to address the risk, but we shouldn't exaggerate the risks, because there are many things that we can do with AI for our benefit. And so yes, and I also think I'm a professor. I have students in front of me all the time, worried about their future, wondering whether what they're learning is worth it. If there will be, at some point, an AI robot that will deliver legal advice, and there will be no need for them. I don't believe in this big replacement. I think it's a tool. So we are learning to use it. We know the flaws of this tool, and so there is room for human competence. Just yes, or jobs will be transformed. They are being transformed, and they will be transformed. But yes, I'm still an optimist. I think there is still room for creativity. I think we will always have artists and painters and writers, hopefully. I'm still, yes, I still believe in innovation.
And interesting that you mentioned your students. I think this age, so young adults, I wouldn't want to be a younger adult right now. It's challenging. Imagine you're in the university, and then now you see all this AI first talk, and especially there are so many studies showing that the worst impact is on juniors, right? They don't have that time to experiment, and now they are forced. Either you use what you have to prove is that you know how to use AI. What about your time to experiment, to see how you're to try to upskill? No, you have to show your boss that you're a good AI pilot, and that kind of steals valuable time for experimentation and development. So it's interesting what you said about your students. So good that they have a very optimistic professor that inspires them to find creativity and room for excellence. My last question is, what is your final message to the audience, Florence? Can be anything, can be where to find you, can be an inspirational, can be anything you want.
No, my main message is that I wanted to say stay optimist, but I've just already said that. So what I would say is that we need to stay curious as well, because of course AI is fascinating. We see evolution on a monthly basis, so there is always something new. So we need to be very realistic about the risks, about the flaws, about what we're seeing emerging, about people, getting addicted to social media algorithms, or people getting too much influenced by their AI tool. So we need to be realistic about this. We first we need to, be informed, and we also need to be informed and curious about all the possibilities that AI is opening for us, because this is what defines us at the end of the day. We are human beings. We think for ourselves. We are autonomous. And so we need to keep this autonomy. We shouldn't let AI think for us. So stay optimist and stay curious. And yes, get information on Luiza's newsletter, which is something that I do regularly. So this would be my final word. To read your newsletter.
Thank you so much, Florence. It was a pleasure to have you in the podcast today. Thank you to the audience. I hope you will download, if you haven't already, download Professor Giselle's report. Remember, regulating under uncertainty, governance options for generative AI. Is there any social media that you use that they can follow you? Any
On
blog or
LinkedIn.
any
LinkedIn.
You can also follow Professor Giselle on LinkedIn. So thank you, everyone, and see you in the next episode.